Oh boy, that puts me in if I heard it.
Welcome to Lansing Online News Radio. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're doing Lansing Online News Radio this evening with me, Bonnie Bucqueroux, and with my co-host, Bill Castanier. And we're going to devote most of our time tonight to a broad issue related to issues such as campaign finance and the recent decisions on corporations as people. But first, Bill, you had a little bit of a wrap-up on some things you wanted to tell people that are coming up.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about is there's an exhibit at Michigan State University Museum, and that's the one on the circle. And just as a added bonus to get there, it looks like they're creating a Boston subway on the circle. You probably know that, Bonnie, on campus. The whole circle is closed.
Oh, yes.
It's amazing. You can't go anywhere on the circle. But anyway, the exhibit is hosting for about 3 months kind of a celebration of a very famous book from which is celebrating its 50th anniversary, and that is Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And the reason that MSU is involved in it is Rachel Carson communicated extensively with a professor on campus who was doing research on DDT during that same time. And they wrote many, many letters back and forth to each other. And about 3 years ago, those letters were given to the university. They had been held by the family, so no one knew they existed. So they're kind of neat. Now, that's not the total focus of the exhibit is the letters, but what I think just for reference for people who might not know about Silent Spring, basically MSU at the time was spraying, and everybody actually was spraying for Dutch elm disease, trying to kill a little beetle. Well, DDT is probably the best thing to kill anything that moves in the insect world.
Right.
It was used to kill lice during World War II. It was used to kill malaria, to control malaria. So MSU and many, many, many places around the country were spraying for both mosquitoes and these specific Dutch elm disease critters. And what happened is the birds started to die. Very bad deaths too. They go into tremors, and interestingly enough, video of that was caught by this researcher. So there's some archival video there that shows that. At the same time, Rachel Carson was kind of pursuing this angle about the bald eagle,
right,
which was dying also because it couldn't reproduce. So these two came together, and Rachel Carson used many, many sites on the campus. She did not visit campus in her book, and she also used a lot of the research that Dr. Wallace and several students developed during that period of time. It's sort of a recap of that time in history, but it also goes a little bit further. It talks about gender, basically it's the pesticide industry tried to destroy her with gender-based lies.
Yes.
And characterizing.
What an oddity.
Isn't that a surprise in today's world? That's why I was telling the guy who was giving me the tour. I said, this is brand new, isn't it? This is sort of a new way of doing business.
Never heard of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be fascinated by the exhibit. It is chilling, though. I mean, we were using these giant robots to spray this. In this case, it would be like a rain.
No, we just hired Kellogg.
Oh, yeah. Well, that really was the beginning of the modern environmental movement.
Absolutely.
Silent Spring.
It took 10 years about to get DDT banned, but a little longer than that to get the Environmental Protection Agency banned. But that was the beginning. It was also the beginning of something I hadn't thought of, environmental ethics.
Right.
When people started to understand there was more to this than just looking at the nature. You had some requirements if you were a professional. But I think people will find it fascinating. You'll also see some Theodore Geisel ads for DDT, which are really, it's kind of the pre-Lorax stuff, and it looks like the Lorax.
Theodore Geisel was Dr. Seuss.
Dr. Seuss, yeah. And a lot of people said that he was making up for doing these ads for 10 years for DDT. Yeah. And the other thing that was kind of interesting is there's a photograph of a model that appeared in Life magazine, full page, standing in a DDT mist at the Jones Beach in a swimsuit, eating a hot dog and drinking a Coca-Cola.
Saying it was just fine.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
What more could go wrong?
I happened to be in the mid-'70s at the American Ag Editors Association meeting when there was a gentleman on stage from the chemical industry talking about pesticide safety. And a farm woman in the back of the audience got up and talked about how, I'm not afraid of that stuff. When they were out there spraying with the crop duster at my house the other day, I was feeding people ham sandwiches out there in the field right underneath. And I watched the guy on stage go green. He had just been giving them the big everything is fine look, and he all of a sudden went green around the gills, realizing
it looked like a Lorax or something. Yeah. No, I remember, and this is something to me that's even terrible to recall in retrospect. As a young, maybe about a 10-year-old, we had a lot of boys in the neighborhood. We'd hitch up behind this guy's very large tractor. He would spray about 10 lawns with that. Oh. Not the liquid, but the atomized it.
So it was a mist.
It was a mist, but it became like a cloud.
Right.
And we'd spend an hour out there. It was so much fun. Don't ask about
2,4-D or DDT. Yes, yeah. They were both very popular when they were used for multiple things.
So I think especially people that have no clue, especially school children who go to that exhibit a lot, are going to really come away with an understanding. It's a little bit scary.
It's kind of too bad that she did not live long enough to see the impact that she had.
Yes, she was dying of cancer when she wrote the book, and almost didn't finish it.
I wonder if books have that kind of impact anymore. I mean, we're here on the anniversary of Rio 20. Where it seems like absolutely nothing came out of the recent efforts to try to get a handle on climate change. There were no binding treaties signed there. In fact, it was just really a failure. And they've been a failure for 20 years now, so it's really disappointing. I don't know that a book could have the kind of impact that hers did.
I'm not sure. I really am not sure. I can't recall one off the top of my head really right now. There's a list that the Library of Congress put together. These are fiction and nonfiction. Of 88 books that shaped America. Oh. It's a darn interesting list. But it includes your popular books like Catch-22 or Catcher in the Rye.
So it was both fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, Thomas Paine books. But that Silent Spring is definitely on that list. Mm-hmm. I remember reading it in around 63. For school. We read it in school.
It's hard to remember that there was a pre-environmental movement time. We think of it as being so saturated to the end, but it was a relatively new phenomenon. I remember growing some gravel board when I went down to Nashville and received the training from Al Gore. I remember him being heartened by the thought that we came together on things like DDT and signed treaties that banned its use ultimately around the planet, and that we did the same thing for the aerosol hydrofluorocarbons. But the reality, of course, is that we don't have that kind of international consensus anymore, where we seem to be incapable to stand up against the corporation.
On the DDT note, I should know, this is Todd Haywood, by the way, that we've actually gone backwards on that. We've now begun authorizing the use of DDT all over the world, particularly in countries like India and in Equatorial Africa, to control mosquitoes that are doing malaria as part of our HIV/AIDS program. So we're actually using PEPFAR funds to poison people in Equatorial Africa and India.
And that is brought up in this exhibit too, sort of the quandary that developing countries find themselves in, because 1 million people are dying from malaria every year versus 1.5 million people who would die 10 years from now or something.
Right.
It's a balance, but DDT is still the most effective killer of the mosquito.
One of the things about DDT is it's always been dubious as to how much of a carcinogen it ever was, but it certainly harmed wildlife because of the thinning of the eggshells and other problems. There were other chemicals that came along in that pesticide arsenal that were probably much more dangerous, but DDT got all the original attention. What we forget is that industrial ag came about because after World War II we had these stockpiles of nerve gas and other things that we left over. Geez, we didn't monetize these. That's the new word. I don't think they used monetize back then. So they repurposed them. That's what we do now. Organophosphates, yes indeed. So we have a lot of background.
The other thing the exhibit takes on, which is in a way very brave, is Agent Orange.
Oh, does it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, excellent.
So it's a really good look at chemicals. And what their place is in the world. Now, it doesn't take one side or the other. You can clearly tell the side I took after seeing the birds flop around. It's sort of...
Yeah, even if it's only the birds, right?
The first thing you see when you walk in are 4 dead robins, which they actually did cold case on to make sure that robins did die from DDT. That's the only chemical they found in excess. Yeah. There was no mercury, which was 100%.
And the industry did push back, didn't it?
Oh, they more than pushed back.
What did they do to her?
They first said, how could a woman be qualified to do this?
Okay.
They questioned her credentials.
All right.
They questioned the research, and some of the research wasn't great research, frankly. But as George Wallace said, he's glad that somebody's taking it on because in 20 years it'll be 30 years too late.
That's exactly right. And what we're looking at now are things.
That's the kind of thing that was most telling to me is you can't wait. You just can't wait until all the research is in.
What did we do this past year at Earth Day? Not much. I don't remember anything terribly startling.
Well, here's a little for you on that. How long do we need the studies before it's too late? They just reopened the Kalamazoo River after the oil spill. They've still got dozens of acres of submerged oil on the bottom of the river that's contaminated with heavy metals like mercury and rubidium and that sort of stuff. Yet they've opened the river and they say, well, if you get exposed to the oil, just wash it off. Everything will be okay.
With the same water that came out of the river.
Because there's nothing dangerous here. We've done some studies and they show that there's no danger. And of course the toxicologists that I've spoken to all say, wrong. I wouldn't go swimming in that river. So, we're trying to do an invite for the governor to take his children swimming in the river.
That would be nice.
And I think Brian Kelly should take his daughter, who just had open heart surgery, swimming in the river.
You're cruel man.
What? No, if it's so safe, and the health department is right, then they should be able to go without any powers of chemicals.
I remember when Governor Engler said that he would happily eat a steak with 10 parts per million PBB. I thought to myself, where's the steak when you need it? I'd be happy to grill that for him right now and get that right.
Well, in fact, PBB is not mentioned in this, but how can you not think about it if you knew about PBB at all?
I know. Michigan. Well, I think probably until the BP oil spill, that was the biggest environmental poisoning in the country. PBB may still well be the most, that was offshore, so I suspect it makes some difference.
Well, it's still part of the reason why there was such a panic when the oil spill happened in Kalamazoo to begin with, because it stopped just within a mile of that Superfund site that's all PBB and PCB lines. And they were terrified. What are the interactions going to be between this Superfund site and this heavy oil? That's why they lowered the level on Morrow Lake, is in order to prevent that connection between the two Superfund sites.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Todd, because I was at a press conference on Thursday about coal ash disposal, and the North Lansing coal ash site, which is on Lake Lansing Road for Board of Water and Light, it appears it is still leaching into the substrata. And what they're afraid of is that will come together with the diamond reel, not the diamond reel. This is the diamond reel plant, or the motor wheel plant.
Okay,
motor wheel plant, which isn't very far. It's on Lake Lansing basically also. So they're afraid those two sites could meet, and they don't know what will happen
because of the chemical leaching from both.
Both, yeah.
So there's a synergy potentially.
There's possibly that, right? Yeah, it's not the kind of thing you can experiment with.
Roland Collins would like to join in on that conversation.
You mentioned Governor Engler saying he would eat a hamburger with 10 steaks.
He wanted a steak. He wouldn't eat just hamburger.
That wouldn't be good enough for him.
Not in the crowd.
Do you remember earlier this year when the pink slime was going? There was the controversy over that, and the Republican, three Republican governors went and ate some of the pink slime at the factories.
Right.
There was Rick Perry and two others. I don't remember.
Can't think of any more that I'd have. I just wish they'd eat more of it.
Some pink slime pudding.
What a treat.
Rich Robinson is here from the Michigan Campaign Network, our Campaign Finance Network. And really, this is getting at the issue that we thought we would like to focus a lot of attention on this evening. Here, we're at LCC Radio, WLNZ, here at 89.7 Lansing, Michigan. We've been talking about the Supreme Court decision that came down today about Montana and Citizens United. And Rich, maybe you can fill us in a little bit about what's been happening on this. What does Citizens United mean, and why does the decision today make it even tougher to get anything done with campaign finance?
Well, the decision today was kind of the last gasp, or in case you thought there was a change of heart on the Roberts Court, and there hasn't been. Their position is that corporations can spend as much as they want, quote unquote, independently of candidates in our politics. And The Montana challenge was based on the Montana law that went back to the days of the copper barons, and the U.S. senator quite literally bought off the whole legislature to be elected to the Senate, and so this was a century-old ban on corporate money in Montana state campaigns, and they thought they'd give it a run, but no dice. So our campaigns remain wide open to unlimited spending, a lot of it unreported spending, that which uses nonprofit corporations as their delivery vehicles. And so more and more, the driving force behind our elections comes from fewer and fewer sources. So it's, talk about monetizing. This is monetizing democracy. Money does make a difference in the outcome of elections. I think money makes a difference after the fact, after election day, and policy agendas of those who win election. And, as we talked about our capacity to kill our planet on an industrial scale, I think a lot of the leeway that's given for that kind of conduct, unethical conduct, is bought with the kind of money that flows in our politics. I mean, it used to be $1 million was a very uncommon thing, but now you've got people well into tens of millions, and this isn't the first time for that, but so much of it now is secret. Since the day after the Michigan presidential primary, there's been $8 million worth of television ads targeting Obama, the Obama administration, Obama policies, by sources that will never be disclosed. In fact, these don't even have to be reported to the Federal Election Commission because it's not within the reporting window before an election. So here we are. We're the one state where the Obama campaign hasn't answered back to this kind of thing. Really? There are 10 states that have been targets: Ohio, Virginia, Florida, Wisconsin, Iowa, Colorado, and so forth.
Swing states.
Swing states, all the swing states. The Obama campaign itself answered back with ads in every state except Michigan. So evidently they think they can ride it out here without spending the money. And of course, if you looked at their reports from last month, that campaign's spending a lot of money. Right. So the burn rate this early in an election cycle is stunning. It's stunning. And, but I think a lot of that owes to the fact that these nonprofit corporations are being used as delivery vehicles. Anonymity is guaranteed to the donors. So the last month in Michigan, it's been Crossroads GPS. This is Carl Rove's project. Prior to that, it was a group, American Future Fund, Americans for Prosperity, Over 60 Alliance, and Energy Alliance. 5 of these groups ran through the same ad agency. So one would go for 2 weeks, then the next one 2 weeks, the next one 2 weeks. So this is a well-orchestrated effort, well-financed, and this is the way of our politics now.
Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg today expressed some hope originally that, Anthony Kennedy had argued that he didn't think that Citizens United didn't deal with corruption. They didn't have to worry about corruption, that this kind of money wouldn't be corrupting. Well, in the past 2 years, I think, since that decision, we've seen that it is indeed corrupting. She had hoped this was an opportunity to revisit that decision. It doesn't get revisited again forever, does it? I mean, basically for a long time.
Until the potential majority on the court changes, there's not much use in it, and I don't think they'd have much flavor for picking it up again. So I think that's right. I think that we're stuck with the unlimited spending for the foreseeable future, but something can be done about disclosure. They're not going to do it for us, but something can be done about it. Now it's stalemated again in Congress. The last Congress, a version of the Disclose Act passed both chambers, but or was filibustered in the Senate rather. But it was a poor bill because it allowed for groups with large memberships to have a pass on the reporting. So the National Rifle Association, Sierra Club would all have an exemption. And, I don't care about your members' dues, but if somebody is using you as the black box to run 10 or $50 million through, people should have a right to know that.
We know the names of some of these people, though, and I don't know how much good it does us. I mean, we know Stanley Adelson and the Koch brothers, and they've sort of become the poster children for this kind of wretched excess. But it doesn't seem that really gives us any vehicle to restrain their behavior or to resist what it is.
No, it doesn't. And now the pushback against the idea of disclosure is to claim intimidation. And
right.
In fact,
we're seeing that with gay marriage proposals. The National Organization of Marriage is we can't disclose who our donors are because they'll be abused by the evil homosexuals who are going to run them down and beat them up in the street.
They're going to go into their restaurants and eat mustard and have a puke in or something.
I like that.
Well, that's a great idea.
Well, in the Citizens United decision in the first place that allowed corporate spending, there was also the question of is it permissible to require disclosure? And that was an 8-1 vote. And absolutely, disclosure is constitutionally permissible. And the only dissenting vote was Clarence Thomas. And on Thomas,
gee, there's a surprise.
Well, in Jeffrey Rosen's book, The Nine, he talks about Scalia being asked to compare his judicial philosophy to Clarence Thomas. Scalia says, I'm an originalist, not crazy. So, Clarence Thomas may be a brilliant man, but he's a radical.
Getting to the right of Scalia is a difficult feat at best.
Well, it's also important to note that none of these Supreme Court justices have ever worked on elections either. So they, rationally they can't really make basically conclusions about election spending based on experience from elections.
They don't exactly run partisan campaigns to get onto the Supreme Court. Yes,
not anymore.
Well, but Sandra Day O'Connor had that experience of being a politician, and it was a perspective that was very valuable, and it was when she left and Alito came in that the whole thing broke down.
Well, and I think it's also important, sort of going back, you were talking about the different groups that appear. A lot of these, you were talking about how they use the same ad agency. A lot of them use the same P.O. box as well.
Right. At a UPS store in Alexandria, Virginia.
And it's all run out of one. I mean, one person is paid from the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee to be the agent for these different nonprofits. It's really, when you start digging into it, it's quite stunning how manipulative all of these things
It's a huge, elaborate game of money laundering, and contemporary politics is nothing so much as money laundering on a massive scale.
It is. We're joined also by Roman Collins, who may be our youngest guest, so he's the only one optimistic that we'll actually get rid of Citizens United. He is part of the Move to Amend movement, which is going to have quite a list of activities here in Michigan on Thursday. Is that right, Roman? That's when a lot of the attempts to tell people what is this movement all about and who's coming and what's going on.
Well, you said Thursday, David Cobb is coming into Lansing at Gunwire Cafe at 6:30 p.m. and basically he's a national spokesperson for Move to Amend. He'll be talking a lot about what we just talked about, but in more of a historical context about the Supreme Court and how this decision was made. And basically, the Move to Amend movement is about amending the U.S. Constitution to say that corporations are not people and money is not speech, and both can be regulated.
And so we're looking at, I keep saying, corporations are people, how come they don't execute them in Texas? But apparently they like them in Texas, is what the problem is. In fact, they seem to like them all over.
Witness protection program down there.
What is the plan when they talk about passing a constitutional amendment? What are the series of steps that have to take place from here for that to happen? If it were a ballot proposal this fall, I think people would vote for it. But I don't know that what will it take to get it to the level that we ever get a chance to express our views on it?
Well, first we need to build a grassroots culture against Citizens United, and we need to raise awareness of Move to Amend and other campaigns like it. And then also, once we have the political support to do this, we need 2/3 of the states to call on Congress to amend the Constitution. And then what happens is after Congress passes it, it sends it back to the states to be ratified, and then 2 or 3/4 of the states have to ratify it.
Those of us who went through the ERA,
Which they thought was a done deal, right?
We thought it was a done
Right.
deal. Who would not want to give equal rights to women? Oh,
Phyllis Schlafly, right?
Phyllis Schlafly, and she
Jace
was
Bolger.
extraordinarily. Jace Bolger. Come to think of it, that's the reason that we were busy Monday night. I was scurrying down here last Monday evening to the Capitol. I didn't get to see the vagina monologues. You got to see.
I did.
And give us a little wrap up.
They said vagina more than in the history of Michigan. We heard more talk about female parts. I think there were several Republicans that huddled from embarrassment or hearing it in mixed crowd.
Yeah. They can only talk about it with other men.
That's right.
Or as Romney says, in quiet rooms.
That's right. I think, honestly, I mean, all joking aside, I think it was a huge blunder on the Republican side.
Really?
I think they continued to blunder it right through, even after the vagina monologues event. They were still stumbling over themselves.
They did.
I think they did nothing but hand Lisa Brown her Oakland County clerk race in Oakland County.
Absolutely.
They can't help themselves.
No, they really
They're
can't.
just
That was
fundamentally sexist.
That was the gist of my little article in Lansing Online News. Is that it's in their DNA. It's not. They can't help themselves.
But I do think that one of the things that we saw is that in 72 hours, the women from the House and the Senate did something that we have not seen happen a lot in this state, and that is bring 3,000 people to the steps of the Capitol to say, no, what happened here is unacceptable, and we're going to talk about it.
On a Monday night when it's 100 degrees.
It was good theater.
72 hours later.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Have any of them apologized for that?
No.
In your dreams.
No, in fact, recently
they didn't like the attitude.
I was at a meeting of, I'm now the co-president of the local Now chapter, and the state Now and Lansing Now met at Gone Wired after, to talk about debrief from some of those events. And the amusing part was that everybody was saying, somebody's got to stop Ari Adler from issuing those pronouncements. And he said, no, we want him to issue more of them.
Yes,
Next
please,
time
Ari.
we'll have 10,000 women at the state capitol.
I do think that played into it. I also think people saw the video of Lisa Brown's statement and were just fundamentally flabbergasted that she was punished for that. I think
and to back up a step further, to watch the spectacle of those legislators being pushed around by Right to Life.
Yeah.
Here, we've got this wacky idea of what we can do to reproductive self-determination. Get out there and run these bills. I mean, these people are out of the 18th century or something.
I put up the video of Rachel Manabron picked it up, and that was at the hearing where they tried to shut it off 10 minutes early, and a woman who had come down from Mount Pleasant started screaming, "You can't do this." They wouldn't let any of the women. They chose 3 men to speak from the anti-side.
That's because Congress is their role model.
Exactly. I mean, it was just a disaster for them. I mean, they did, but they really think that they're on the winning side of this.
Well, that's because they've got lots of money coming from Right to Life, and more important than the money in Michigan politics, at least, is the ground troops.
And they do have that Tea Party contingent that really is. I saw when I went to the Sharia law hearings. That was a fun thing. God, I go to all the fun places. I tell you, I brought my
Defend the homeland.
Yes, we went to the video of those, and we had conservative Catholics, and we had fundamentalist Christians, and we had the Tea Party together on the same one. And that's a really powerful group in the state. I thought they'd gone away, but they haven't. They've just gone to ground.
And that's why I keep pointing to the Senate race, where everybody says Hoekstra's got it because Hoekstra's got the name recognition. Hoekstra just lost the Right to Life nomination to Gary Glenn, who also got the Tea Party nomination. I'm telling you, that's the upset. Gary Glenn is going to win the nomination for something.
Is this your prediction?
No, I'll take that back. I will take that back. Clark Durant could, but I don't think Gary Glenn's got a snowball's chance.
Is that wishful thinking?
Well, he doesn't have 5 cents. Right to Life doesn't have money either. What they've got are mailing lists, and they rent those mailing lists. So
they do?
They make those as in-kind contributions, and that's their powers, their endorsements and their ability to mobilize largely Christian activists. So that's Gary Glenn.
They do have the pulpit, and that's people who are there 2 or 3 times a week, very dedicated to the church. And that's not, we don't have a similar kind of organizing institutional vehicle on the left compared to that. And
No,
that makes
we
it
don't.
Well,
so-
or a body of cranks who will go out and stand at abortion clinics on Saturday morning and hector people. I mean, what is it with these people?
Well, I mean, to be fair, and this is going to set Bonnie
Oh,
off.
no, be fair.
To be fair, these are people who have truly deeply held beliefs. Now, I disagree with those beliefs, but I can respect somebody for acting on their beliefs. I can't respect somebody who blows up an abortion clinic or such. I don't think that that's an acceptable expression of I believe in life, let me go kill someone.
Right.
But I do think that people who pray and protest at abortion clinics are no different than if I led a protest against anti-gay policies at LCC.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ, 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan.
Would you have a sign that said "Pills Kill"?
Ah, yes.
It depends on which pill.
That's the hottest sign.
But they're persuaded that it does.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they push the idea that there's a link between abortions and breast cancer. They push the idea that the pill is dangerous because it kills people. They take they're calling basically every kind of contraception that's medically based an abortifacient. So they take a very, very hard line on all these things.
Not against war.
No.
Or death penalty.
They don't much like people once they're born. They're just
You have a right to life until you're
Funding
born.
or prison, as opposed to prison funding.
2.3 million different dollars. Yes. Yeah.
So, but I just wanted to sort of clarify that I do think that some of this motivation in that group in particular is a deep faith.
Well, I
Point
went
well
to the
taken.
hearing where they were talking about trying to take the religious exception that would be possible if Obamacare is upheld, and expanding that in the state of Michigan to all the health insurance companies.
And all religions.
facilities.
Invent your own.
I thought that's what made Representative Lisa Brown's talk so powerful. She talked about being an Orthodox
Absolutely.
Jew, how she keeps two sets of plates, but that in her religion, if you go to the hospital, they favor the saving the life of the mother and not the child, which is the reverse of the Catholic position. And she said, but we don't run our hospitals. It's not our choice to make. We leave that up to individual choice. So there's what I would call the appropriate response to strongly held religious beliefs. It's that those are mine, and that's how I would live my life, but that's not how I demand you live yours.
I agree with you, and I think that is part of the reason why Lisa Brown was so offensive to Jim Stantz. I don't think it had anything to do with her talking about her vagina or saying no means no. I think it had everything to do with the fact that she undermined the entire religious argument.
Well, I think so too.
And I think focusing it on vaginas and no means no really detracted away from the bigger argument, which was where as a secular country do we draw the line between church and state? And I think she made a perfect argument about that. And I think that because of that is the reason why we saw her punished.
Yeah, we've talked before about how, you may have a religious objection to war and to killing in war, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to pay your federal taxes. I mean, we have all had a long-standing tradition that we honor your individual beliefs, but if you choose to go against our laws, you pay the consequences for it. So that's going to be a big issue here in Michigan. I've heard that the governor has decided to back off of this and that it's already asked elements of the law to be taken out of the bill that was passed, 5711. But it seems to me that he's not having his toes sufficiently held to the fire about why these sorts of backroom deals are even possible.
Well, I think that's part of it, but I also think, you talk about this conscience issue, I sort of want to step back.
Okay.
There was legislation, 5040, that passed the House, allowing counseling students to object to counsel people because they had a moral or religious objection to them.
To treating LGBT.
To LGBT people. It was specifically written after Julia Ward was kicked out of Eastern Michigan University for refusing to counsel a gay student. But I did an interview with the Senate sponsor of that bill. And I can't remember his name now off the top of my head. Tupac Hunter, Senator Tupac Hunter from Detroit. And I asked him, so Senator, you're okay with a counselor saying, no, I won't counsel a gay person because it's against my religious beliefs? Absolutely, I think that's okay. So then I said, Senator Hunter, are you okay with a Christian identitist from the Thumb area refusing to counsel a black person because they're black? Well, that's ridiculous. Nobody would ever do that. Well, that's their firmly held religious beliefs. Yeah, I draw the line there. You've gone too far. And he hung up on me. So I think when we start talking about religious exemptions, we have to start really being clear about what we're really talking about.
It's our own personal views, yes,
Exactly.
And we atheists, of course, love these kinds of discussions because we feel morally pure just across the board. Because we have no strongly held
To counsel no one.
Absolutely not. Yeah. Or all comers, you know.
Yeah, or.
I mean, I felt sorry the other night for Jerry Sandusky. That shows you how far I.
Wow. Okay, that's too far.
You felt sorry. Why did you feel sorry?
Because I think that is a
genetic.
Yeah, I think he's ill.
Yep.
And I was very uncomfortable with a lot of the rhetoric, including when I posted something on Facebook, and somebody who I really do respect had talked about how, well, I hope he, is hurt in prison and all that. No, I don't.
Yeah, I saw stuff posted up about he's going to go from a tight end to a wide receiver, and that kind of language. First of all, it's homophobic.
Right. Now that's what I think was underlying a lot of the vitriolic hatred.
If he had been accused of molesting little girls, we would not have had the psychosis that we have over this case. I mean, that's just the reality. It's because it was challenging the manhood of these children, these boys.
Yes.
And that's
that
why
made it
evil.
So evil. Yes.
Yeah. So it was associated with football.
Yes.
Yeah, well, if he'd been raping little girls and somebody walked in, would the guy have asked his father whether he should have stopped this or not? I mean,
no, the guy would have immediately called the police. There wouldn't have been a pause.
That's interesting, though. So you think that distinction would have been different as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
Absolutely.
But they don't want to believe that he didn't want to believe that he would touch a boy.
I don't believe that this man that I have this great deal of respect for would touch a boy. It's also I don't believe that he's gay because he's got a wife.
It's reflecting his inner Catholicism. We've got a tolerance for this stuff in the Catholic Church. They have, how many centuries are running an underground railroad for child molesters?
We all, I remember growing up as a kid in the 40s, and that was just the word on the street.
Right.
I mean, everybody knew that. And when I was a kid, we talked about that. Oh, don't let the altar boys hang out behind the altar there with the priest because, he's going to come for you there.
I don't think that was a 20th century innovation.
No. And yet everybody treats us as if nobody talked about it up until this recent era. And of course, it was an open secret.
Well, the difference is that this recent era has led to criminal charges and civil liabilities against the church, which have never historically been ever placed on the church. That's the change.
The big interesting thing to me is going to be what kind of penalty does Penn State pay? It will be financial and it will be substantial, and my assumption is, and that I don't know. I mean, they'll just give them the football stadium, all the proceeds, or
for 50 years.
For 50 years, that seems fair.
Well, after the convictions were announced, Penn State said, well, we've set up a system to handle privately and securely and quickly these complaints from his victims. And we've also set up a system to bring those complaints in. And we've set up a new system to accept complaints about sexual abuse so that we have ways to deal with them. I mean, they're trying to spin from behind is what's happening. And really, they're not addressing the real issue, which is you had a sports program that was so beloved, so worshipped, that nobody wanted to challenge the gods or fear that they would be in trouble. I mean, I've had my run-ins with Michigan State University over that scenario.
Well, they close ranks and really don't. I mean, large institutions, that's part of what happens nowadays. I call it sort of the public relationization of everything. I mean, everything is fun nowadays. You can't ask anybody anything. I remember doing a program for the state of Michigan under what I thought was supposed to be a relatively enlightened democratic. Oh boy. I'm never too old to be naive, I guess. And it was supposed to be, the grant said something about this problem in Michigan, and I put Michigan in the title, and they said, we can't say Michigan. We don't want anything negative attached to the name of the state of Michigan, do we? Everything is PR. It has nothing to do with solving problems. It has to do with putting a gloss on the problem so you pretend that you don't have a problem to begin with. So that's why you can't really grapple with anything. I'm reading the book Twilight of the Elites by Chris Hayes, and I would really urge people, if you get a chance to watch his show, his 2-hour show on Saturdays and Sundays on MSNBC in the morning. Brilliant young man, and he talks about the fact that all of our institutions have failed us. I mean, when we look at the left, really what we're talking about is, we're talking tonight about the failure of corporations. The right seems to love corporations. They still have faith. We're the greatest country in the world.
I'd like to interrupt you. Yeah. I don't think it's the failure of corporations. I think they're doing quite well. I think it's more the failure of the Supreme Court and our federal and local representatives.
Well, I would argue that the failure of corporations is not because they're not financially successful. The failure to take care of the mandate goes beyond just making money. Unfortunately, when we established corporations as a legal entity, we restricted them to that, which I think was part of the problem.
And they couldn't get charters if they did not serve a public good. There's actually an 1809 Supreme Court case.
Yes.
And so instead of an ethic of sustainability, we have an ethic of, hey, somebody could make a buck on that.
Right.
Get out of the way.
And that's the only thing that you'll be held accountable for, is being responsible to your stockholders for making a profit. And that, to me, is so narrow a view. I had the privilege once of bringing, I was going to call him Buckminster Fuller, but he's not. It's the other guy. But he said the problem with the United States is we need half capitalism and half socialism. We need to be able to have the free market, but we also need to understand that they must be socially responsible.
Listen, you socialists. I don't want to hear that kind of stuff.
I know. Look what's happening to Europe nowadays.
We're in America. We're in America.
We're going to hear a lot of that.
Corporatocracy.
We are a corporatocracy, and that's what bothers me nowadays, because I don't see. Roland and I were talking earlier today, and he's very optimistic about being able to make this kind of grassroots change. I wish I were that optimistic nowadays. What do you think will happen, Roland? You're in your teens. By the time that you're 30 years old, what do you hope will happen in this country?
Well, I mean, there's mass public support among independents, Democrats, and Republicans, basically saying that corporations and super PACs have too much power over the political system.
I think that you're right.
So we already know that the
if
emotions
the people had
are there.
A say, yeah.
But if we need like I said earlier in the show, we need a grassroots movement to form out of that anger, and we need to focus that at doing a goal that will actually fix the system, which is amending the U.S. Constitution and preventing these corporations and billionaires from bankrolling our elections. And so, I mean, David Cobb was interviewed recently as a spokesperson for Move to Amend, and he expects that it would be done in a decade. I don't know how long it takes, and frankly, I don't care as long as it's done, because it needs to be done. So I expect to work on this for a long time.
So let me toss the monkey wrench on this. I mean, I'm glad he's optimistic. I share your pessimism on this. But there's one monkey wrench, and that is people are outraged, but they're not going to put their money into this. And it's going to take
and that's
money.
the thing. Congress responds to the funders, not to the voters. And
that's the challenge, isn't it?
It really is.
Money is speech in that case.
Yeah, and that's
up on two legs. Come on,
if you want a voice, be a billionaire.
Right, exactly.
Well, actually, we do have a lot of rich people supporting this. I mean, I know. Actually, we're working on a campaign at Move to Amend. It's called the Stampede Campaign, where basically, who are the owners of Ben and Jerry's?
Oh yeah,
so
Ben and Jerry.
Ben and Jerry.
Okay, it's either Ben or Jerry is supporting this.
Or we're going to have an ice cream brand.
Where basically, this Stampede campaign is we're going to rubber stamp dollars.
Yes,
to say
I heard about that.
not to be used for bribing politicians, and corporations are not people, and money is not speech. So we actually do have a lot of donors and people supporting our movement. We just need to use that money to reach out to the people.
Now, can I inject my optimism in this?
Yes.
All you have to do is switch one Supreme Court justice.
Just one.
Just one. And I think that's what's going to happen
as long as
here.
It's
and
not
that's what will reverse this thing. Well,
it's got to be the right one.
Right. Well, at a point, though, that's where this thing will change.
Well, I disagree, actually, because the problem is not only that that corporations are people, but the entire reason.
Corporate money doesn't matter. It's individual billionaires that are throwing the money around. ExxonMobil is not dinking around with this. They've got other ways to approach their business.
Yeah, to manipulate the system.
I mean, like keep the military-industrial complex cranked up and running on high. The problem is the unlimited spending. Nobody has a right to spend without limit. And I read John Paul Stevens' book, Five Chiefs. He's talking about this right from the beginning of Buckley against Vallejo, that where did they come up with this idea that if you spend it, that's corrupting, or that's not corrupting, but giving it is corrupting? I mean, it's the same money going to the same place to do the same thing. And that can be reversed. That's when this madness will be undone.
In fact, LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. I have to get that in every 15 minutes religiously. That's my religious.
Or she gets in trouble.
Well, now I forgot what that was.
You know what'll bring this all crashing down is cartel money.
Cartel money.
Yeah, well, that'll bring it down.
In fact, this Bucqueroux versus Vallejo, the case that decided that money is speech, right? That's it? Okay.
Right.
Basically, that Supreme Court case, so we need to deal with Citizens United and that Supreme Court case both in one amendment. And we need to not waste the effort of amending the Constitution. And that's exactly what Move to Amend is doing. And, in fact, Bucqueroux versus Vallejo, it disenfranchises people who don't have money. Because it says that people who do have money have the right to spend that money in elections. And so what happens to people who don't have money? That means they have less speech than billionaires and millionaires and people who...
You and I can agree on that. The problem is we didn't have 5 votes on the floor.
And I think the other thing to remember on that, woman, is that those folks that don't have the money to spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on a political process are the people that you need to have out there knocking on doors or cooking the coffee and baking the cookies and that sort of stuff in order to make a campaign like this work. And unfortunately, people are so disgusted by politics today that they don't want to engage.
And that's partly a result of all the money going into negative advertising.
Absolutely.
Frank Rich talked about that in his New York Magazine article last week, that the reality is that's how you suppress the vote. What we have is a massive voter suppression effort going on. The reason, Roman, that I think it makes a difference as to whether it happens this year or 10 years from now is that with the changes that are taking place in the law to disenfranchise people so they don't get to the polls, with the constant bombardments of ads making people so disgusted with politics they want nothing to do with it, I think we're at risk of seeing it lost permanently, that we are really on the cusp of this massive amounts of money just really taking away the democracy. We saw what happened recently in Egypt, and there are these spooky sorts of parallels where, they said their version of the Occupy movement, where people were going to make a big cultural change and shift the government. And what they ended up with, unfortunately, was really a military coup where they've now suspended the first democratically elected parliament. And now we have this choice between the military faction and the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood wins, and they may be on their way to a theocracy. I mean, the idea that we're invulnerable to those kinds of problems, I think, to me, is nowadays naive. We're really on the cusp of a major corporate takeover here.
Well, both parties have moved to the right.
Yeah.
And
pro-corporate.
Right. And there's this absolutist stuff coming out of Grover Norquist that there's just a kind of a rabidness about politics on the right. Yeah. And people on the left, I think, are beaten down.
We see, too, that whenever unemployment rates go up, the right surges out of fear. And there was a chart that I saw on Zero Hedge today that showed the correlation between that. And we're seeing a rise of unemployment now again in Europe. Spain and Greece are going off the charts, over 25% unemployment. I watched a discouraging special with Lester Holt on NBC the other night about those 3 families and live outside of Boulder, Colorado, all middle-class people, including a family from Michigan that had moved there and ended up with both of them unemployed, and now he's just working at a running store. And in the old days, they had a monthly nut of $6,000 of bills. How do you do that when you've just got one income from somebody working at a running store? I mean, it's a discouraging. We've seen the middle class shrink in this country to the point where I'm really concerned about where we're headed.
Well, I mean, I think you and I have talked about this in the past. I don't know if we've talked about it on the show or not, but we historically also see a rise in hate groups.
Yes.
With the downturn in the economy. And we've definitely seen that, particularly with the rise of an African-American president. Yeah. The other factor that we have in play here that hasn't been in play in American politics since just before the Civil War is the change of the economy. Right. We are shifting our economic structure. We're going, as in then, we went from agrarian to the industrial age. We're now going from the industrial age to whatever's next, and we're not sure what it is.
Yeah. Fast food.
It may well be fast food.
Casinos in
But
Lansing.
it is.
Bill is practicing. Would you like fries with that, sir?
With that chip.
But I think it's important to recognize that. But the other factor that's at play here that hasn't been at play in that long is the diversification of media voices.
True.
We had the same thing just before the turn of the Civil War. You only went to the places that agreed with you to get your information. We're doing the same thing today with Fox News versus MSNBC versus I'll go to this blog and not that blog because this blog's liberal and that blog's conservative, or vice versa. So I think even as a society, we're shifting ourselves into smaller and smaller groups and separating.
I see that as a false equivalence because what I really see is not, oh, on the left we have MSNBC, oh, I wish.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, we're going to be getting SE Cup any day now in the afternoon.
Thank you for mentioning that.
And what we do have is we have a misinformation machine on the right
Yes.
that has its own network in Fox News.
And then we have CNN who thinks that every issue is just, opinion.
Right, right. Now that you can get, so what we see with recent research is that the most ill-informed people in the country are people who listen exclusively to Fox News, and there's a significant subset of people in the culture who are fed that diet of misinformation. We see this whole foofra with our Attorney General.
Yeah.
Happens to be another black male. Doesn't seem to be that is just random chance. He's sort of the surrogate Obama that they can go for.
Mm-hmm. In fact,
it's turned into this
Bush
huge story
do the same policy?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Bush started
the program.
Right.
It was your brilliantly stupid ATF program. Those of us who have worked in law enforcement always wondered. I mean, we tried to get rid of ATF after Waco because really that was one of the dumber moves we've ever seen. Let's hold a training exercise with sending in people in horse trailers to go with a bunch of religious fundamentalists in a house and send them up and let's have them in ninja suits. That's a good move. Apocalyptic, yes. Very dumb move. The federal government tried to dismantle ATF and parcel it out to other agencies, but one of the things we have learned about the government is it's very difficult to get rid of any intention for bureaucracy. So they were still around to continue their blundering, and they blundered into this Fast and Furious, which was a profoundly stupid move to trace guns by selling them to Mexican drug lords. Oh, that's smart.
Stupid out of the Bush administration?
Stupid out of both.
Yeah, I mean, Bush started it. Obama continued it.
Yeah.
But both of them were stupid.
And then Eric Holder decided to, when the Congress asked him about it, he said, "Oh, we never did that." And it took them 9 months to correct that error. I mean, so we have seen, sort of equal opportunity dumbness taking place in a lot of these things.
Well, the Obama administration did not help that problem at all by claiming executive privilege after saying, the president knew nothing about this, he had nothing to do with it, but now we're going to say executive privilege. Whoa, the right was right to sort of get perked up on that.
Except
if you didn't have anything to do with it.
Privilege covers the branch, not the individual.
Yeah, although it's historically only been there.
How much is the NRA connected to this, if at all?
Oh, they're pushing this big time. I mean,
in favor of ATF.
That we have this whole sort of right-wing bloviating machine, and it involves all the groups that are funded by them. They're extraordinarily well funded. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges, I think, was that the left years ago decided to put a lot of its foundation money into community action. They would give grants of $1 million here, $1 million there for pilot projects on urban projects for the most part. What that really meant was that you got money for 3 years, you did wonderful things, and when the money went away, the program fell apart. So it never made any long-term change. They weren't going to get $1 million a year from any other source, so that was not a very smart investment. Meanwhile, the right was investing in the Cato Institute, the Hoover Institute, taking over all of these right-wing think tanks.
The Leadership Institute.
Yes, and they really promoted these ideas.
And Mackinac Center in Michigan. We really have nothing that counters that. On the left. The left has nothing that counters it to that level. They are good at what they do.
You're a one-man band in many ways, trying to find all this information. Where do you go for information about what's happening to the money in Michigan?
Well, the broadcasters, for the most part. And, I had high hopes that this rule was going to pass the FCC and all the records of the political ads would be online, so we wouldn't have to travel around to collect the records. But they'll get 6 months to adjust to the program once it's adopted, so that won't happen this election cycle.
You were the one who brought ALEC to my attention, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which was really in the business of taking corporate money and then writing legislation. We've seen a lot of it surface in Michigan.
Oh, sure. In Michigan and across the country. I mean, the whole business with photo ID. What can you do with photo ID in this state? They've got a whole program of privatization under the rubric of education choice.
We're now seeing in Michigan communities that will lose all of their private schools in favor of charters.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought I'd ever live long enough to see anything.
Well, you see, Muskegon Heights is going to charters. Their whole public school system.
Right. There won't be a public school there.
It's ridiculous, and it's complete undermining of the promises that we made in the 1963 Michigan Constitution to provide public education.
ComCom. I remember ComCom.
Is
that
that
was 63.
in the Constitution? Is that public education fully funded or what?
Well, this is the challenge. I'm one of those poor kids. I always felt as though I was sort of the emissary that made it out of my neighborhood. You know, talk about how I watched a woman get murdered out of my bedroom window when I was 5. It was exciting. I just say it was before TV. We didn't have TV yet. I thought it was
Street TV.
Street TV.
That was just before they created.
This was
cars.
before Kitty Genovese. You know, this husband chased his wife around with a knife and stabbed her to death, and the neighbors just stood around and went, "Wow, look at that!" You know.
I'm glad to see some things don't change over time.
No, but I mean, the only reason I am here to speak as an emissary is because of the public schools.
Yeah.
I went to an inner city school. It didn't have many resources, but it had a lot of dedicated people who really cared, and they worked with kids, and they gave you a shot, and they told you about a broader world. The college was never a word uttered in my neighborhood. Nobody in my neighborhood had ever been to college. Nobody even talked about sending their kids to college. They thought that was a waste of time. But we had these dedicated public school teachers that really cared about us, and a lot of us made it out. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that happens anymore. I feel like the ladder got pulled up, and all these kids are stuck there now in a way that they don't have the same opportunity that I did because the public schools are there.
They're undermined. They're not gone yet, but
they don't have enough resources.
Undercut. Yeah.
Well, I mean, ALEC was one of the main people behind Public Act 4, right?
Well, I don't know because I don't know where else they've pulled that act. I mean, are emergency managers another national craze? I don't know, but there's a playbook, and everybody's playing from the same playbook, whether it's Scott Walker or Rick Snyder or Rick Scott or whomever. They're all ticking down the same punch list, got the same kind of agenda.
And that's what's really so frustrating, because legislators are now in the business of passing laws that they don't know what they say, because they're being handed boilerplate.
So much so that they leave ALEC information in the bill. Where was that?
Right, yeah, the name appeared.
Right.
Yeah, that you could tell that they were cut and paste from those.
Well, I mean, a perfect example of that was the story that I wrote about Trot and Trot writing the Home Foreclosure Prevention Act for the Republicans. And Senate Majority Leader Bishop telling me, what's the big deal? They do this for us all the time.
That's privatize the legislature.
Yeah. Oh, it is. So, it is happening, and it has been happening, and Trot and Trot was obviously paying to play, being as they were the largest fundraiser for the Republicans every year. And now, is David Trott actually going to run for the 11th now, or is that not going to happen?
No, Nancy Cassis was anointed for that, but
he'll just fund her.
Right. Well, he can tell you how to write that foreclosure program so it'll work real well for the foreclosure attorney.
Yes, and that's exactly what they did.
Right, that's his business.
So,
and it's sort of like blaming the scorpion for doing it because it's in its nature. It's going to sting you. The question is whether you let the scorpion ride your back.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure that's what we've been doing, is we've been letting the scorpion ride our back here in the state of Michigan.
I think we're playing with the scorpion, but no, it won't sting us. It won't sting us.
No, it's perfectly all right. And I think the idea too, I mean, I understand that President Obama has looked into the pot of the PAC money on his side, the super PAC money, and it is much more barren from the corporate donors because they do smell blood in the water. So it's going to be an interesting year. We're going to see a lot of activity on both sides of the equation here. It's been an exciting evening. We've had Rich Robinson from the Michigan Campaign Finance Network. We've had Roman Collins, who's here, and he's with Move to Amend, and I'm so happy to have you here. You come back frequently, Ron, and keep us posted on what's happening. That again is 6:30 at Gone Wire.
Yeah, Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Gone Wire Cafe in Lansing. And you can also look for more areas on the Move to Amend website, movetoamend.org/barnstory.
Great, and thank you to Todd Haywood for joining us again. The Lansing Online News Radio. See us next Monday night, and we will be joined by Clarice Thompson, who has written a new book.
What a jolly good time. Oh,
Wasn't that fun? I get to hit the button.